Welcome to the How We Do Digital Ministry podcast. I'm your host, Charlotte Elia. And on this podcast, we talk to leaders out in the world engaging folks through digital ministry. Today, I am delighted to have with me Dr. Marie-Yust and Dr. Erin Reibel from Real Kids, Real Faith. Thank you so much for being with me this morning.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. I'd like to just start off by inviting you to tell us about this project, share your work with us.
Sure. So Real Kids, Real Faith is an initiative funded by the Lilly Endowment. And we are really trying to work with parents and caregivers and organizational leaders who have nurturing children's spirituality as one of their primary foci. And so we have developed a website, realkidsrealfaith.org, that provides resources and support for parents, caregivers, and organizational leaders with kids birth to 12. As well as we're running a whole bunch of sort of innovation experiments to figure out what best practices might look like in a technologically savvy 21st century.
Awesome. Tell me about the kind of resources that I'm going to find when I visit this website.
Yes, so we have three main categories. One is really focused towards caregivers and parents. One's focused towards those who are supporting families. So this might be leaders, religious leaders, organizational leaders, anyone who's really thinking about how they nurture children's spirituality. And the other one is a useful stuff thing. And that tends to be PDFs, questions. It's straight and to the point. So what you're going to find there for both parents and those who are supporting families are big ideas about how you can think about nurturing children's spirituality. And that might be thinking about thinking about how we work with digital culture and spirituality. That could be one. And how do you think about what's appropriate or not appropriate, or how you can utilize these resources to engage a child or allow a child to provide an opportunity for a child to explore their spirituality more fully. Useful stuff is going to be sort of direct pieces. You can print them off, you can take it, you can ask questions. We work with books, movies, resources, different events. I think most recently we looked at Queen Elizabeth's funeral and how can you engage that big cultural event in a spiritual discussion with your child or with the children that are in your care.
So am I going to find answers to these questions on your site? Is this dogma? No.
What you'll find are activities for exploring the questions. So we think that all of us grow spiritually, whether we're children, youth, or adults, through our own exploration of the questions. So for instance, with Queen Elizabeth's funeral, we suggest that there are a lot of rituals that follow a death, and that one way to help children understand them and begin to see their significance spiritually is to explore different pieces of that. So what's a processional like, and how might one feel if one were trying to show, honor someone through that, or what happens in a funeral? And so we just lay out the possibility of here's a couple of questions or an activity you can do with your child that will help you explore that. Same thing with a school shooting or any other a major movie like the Spider-Man movie or Encanto, Disney movies. What are some questions that will prompt conversation? But we emphasize over and over again that there are many different ways to experience the spiritual and many different possible answers to most of the questions that we ask.
Are you getting responses from folks using your resources, telling you how they are, or do you know who's your primary audience there?
So our primary audience is really families and parents, or caregivers, whoever is taking care of the children. So that's our aim. And then the pieces are also there for those leaders who are supporting those families. But our aim is really to empower parents. We believe that parents are sort of the center of this conversation about children's spirituality. So we want to put that locus of authority back in with the parents or caregivers.
And what we're hearing usually is from, congregational leaders primarily, who have told us that they're sharing our posts when they, and we post twice a week, usually Tuesday, Thursday mornings, that they're sharing our posts with their congregations and that they're getting positive feedback from families about the posts as a resource for those families. But we haven't really heard directly from parents and caregivers because we haven't really asked them to contract with us in that way. But we are getting pretty strong feedback from a number of congregational leaders around the country who've said, oh, we posted this, or a denominational leader who says, we'd like to share your post about the Uvalde school shootings with our audience. How do we credit that? So we know that it's getting attention from organizational leaders and that their families are finding it helpful.
Awesome. You're an important partner with these congregations and denominations there. And stepping in with resources that are vitally needed. Why do you think there's such a kind of dearth of resources around children's ministries?
Yeah. Still. And I think, as someone who's taught Christian education in seminaries for now 25 years, that we've relied really strongly historically on Sunday school curriculum as our primary way of doing children's ministry. And that assumes a couple of things that I don't think we can assume anymore. One, that parents are going to bring their children to church most Sundays for a Sunday school hour, which has been diminishing. And I know a lot of people are saying as we're coming out of COVID, they're seeing numbers decline even more. So that's a problem. And secondly, that families are primarily looking to an organization to provide a program for their kids, when we know that in reality, lots of parents are going online looking for direct resources to support different things that they want to happen. And so the combination of the diminishing Sunday school and the reliance on online resources means that children's ministry needs to move towards providing those more direct resources to families, even if families are still intersecting with the church. Because on a Tuesday afternoon, when a parent is thinking, my child's asking this question, and I don't know, how to explore this issue with them, they're not going to wait until the next Sunday they're in church to ask their pastor about that. They're going to Google it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we hope to be something that pops up with some ideas about how to have that conversation.
Well, and I would also add that the way that we're addressing this is a little bit different. So perhaps your traditional Sunday school lesson is about putting information into a child. And what we are opting to do instead is to open up an avenue for them to explore their own spirituality. So this is more of an expansive understanding than filling them up with information or answering, very technical questions. We want to provide opportunities where they can, with their parents, come to some different understanding or just explore the topic a little bit deeper. So it's a little different than what I think has traditionally been offered.
Yeah. I think in a way we're a model for congregations because each of them can also develop ways that they build a repertoire of materials that they've vetted for parents. And, much like a school teacher might provide that, or a doctor's office might say, hey, log into the portal and here are, our reliable information about childhood illnesses, etc. A congregation can say, hey, these are our families and children. Here's the kinds of resources that we would say you can rely on this information to help you with your child. And we hope realkidsrealfaith.org will be one of the things that's part of that, curated collection. But it's also a way to get to know your families better, because if you are talking with them about, what are the things they're worried about, what are the questions that they fear their children are going to ask, you learn a lot more about families and their lives, and then can meet that need, much like it's almost like a pastoral care approach to Christian education, where you're saying, our families are struggling with work-life balance. Well, what could we say about how to balance that better without saying, oh, well, you should just be showing up on Sunday mornings. Instead, we're like, oh, here's a 2-minute resource on an app that you could use for centering a couple of times a day. Try this out.
Yeah. Wow, that's so fantastic. I love your energy too, this excitement around this. It's an exciting project. And so with that, can you tell me some about the Innovation Hub?
Yes. So I work a lot with the innovators, and what we're looking for is people who are doing something new and different. It does not have to be necessarily in a religious organization. So we have partnered with nonprofit organizations as well, all who are thinking about children's spirituality. How do we nurture children's spirituality? We continue to look for this idea of opening. So, how do you come beside kids and explore with them? How do you provide places for them to engage and explore their own understanding of their spirituality? And they're sort of small projects to see how this is. I would say that when we think about innovation, a lot of times people think about giant programs, and it doesn't have to be that. Sometimes it can just be like a little window. Perhaps it's a centering exercise. Perhaps it's a meditation or something like that you're offering as a little bit of a twist on what is sort of traditionally done or traditional concepts of nurturing spirituality. One of the ones that we've been really excited about is thinking about holy listening with children, which is a practice that, at least in Christian circles, we're very familiar with, but we don't often associate it with children. Again, we largely engage children by this, passing of knowledge. So providing space where children can think about what their soul, what their heart is saying, and figuring out a way to facilitate that has been a really exciting project.
Yeah, we are. We're particularly interested too in the kinds of innovations that can translate to home and family practice, which big programs don't translate to home. Little practices translate to home. So this fall, we're going to have, I think, 6 or 8 possibly sites trying out this holy listening project, which last year we had one site in a Montessori school who had proposed it and done it. So now we're going to see in these varied sites, how does this work similarly or differently to the first project? And then if we discover that it's translatable into these projects, then we're going to start an even larger experimentation. Okay, what if we spread this to even more spaces, ask them to try it out and give feedback as we then develop this practice as something we could share more broadly. And we're always looking for those kinds of ideas, something that is attentive to where families are in life today, the kinds of realities of family life. So again, no lamenting that people don't show up the way we expected them to in the past. It's all about, well, what is going on? What would help them to make space for spirituality? And what resources can we suggest for that? And we look for innovators who can help us determine what that looks like.
Excellent. I'm going to ask this next question, knowing that it's slightly outside of your purview, but I've got these experts here on children's spirituality and the way that they think and learn, and so I got to ask, when you look around and you see what congregations are doing with things like hybrid worship and digital ministries, are there kind of glaring gaps that you see, or maybe misconceptions around their approaches to that?
I would say that there's still a tendency to try to replicate the in-person experience online. And so it's a little bit like when a seminary, has an emergency remote shift, like we all had to do in March. And so you're still trying to teach the same stuff in the same way, you're just using Zoom. And in reality, online engagement is different. It tends to be shorter. It tends to hop from thing to thing. So it wants to see the links between this resource and that resource, or it wants to see material. It can go online, can be passive if you're just watching something for an extended period of time, or you're in a class where you listen and maybe you can type something in the chat, but maybe maybe it's turned off. And in reality, that's not how people usually do things online. So for children's ministry in particular, it's got to be interactive spaces. Erin, several months ago, did a post about creating a virtual room to practice protesting during the summer Black Lives Matter protests. And those kinds of spaces where you create a room, a lot of school teachers were doing this in the at homeschooling time of COVID. And then there's materials in that room to be explored, or where you put different kinds of work, or you can see one another doing things. That's an online approach to learning and education and spiritual engagement that looks very, very different from the usual Sunday school approach. And so I think that the piece that's really missing in many cases is, how does online community work? And how do we play into that rather than trying to replicate the 1 hour class that we would usually hold in person?
I think as well, people still have sort of this negative opinion that online is somehow less than in person. And so, I just think that there's so much possibility in the virtual space. And sometimes we miss that because we're so focused on what it's not. It's not this in-person thing. But when I talk to innovators who are really playing with this online format, some of the things they talk about is that it's so personal, right? Because if you do a Zoom situation, you're in the kid's house. They can go and pick their favorite animal and come and show you. The other thing they note is that parents are in the background. So perhaps in a children's church setting, the parents are in church, the kids are someplace else. They have no idea, what's going on. But in the virtual setting, they're, making breakfast or in the background. And so they're overhearing this, and they're engaged in a way that they're not engaged in the in-person setting. You get this peek into the house, right? What does it look like? What is this? What's the kids, background noise that's happening? The siblings running through, toys, whatever. In ways that you just don't have when they're coming to you. In this virtual setting, you're coming sort of to them. And when we start shifting and looking for all of the possibilities and all of the opportunities that are in this virtual setting, I think we can really step into creating practices that fit that setting, as opposed to just taking stuff from in person and trying to do the exact same thing in a virtual situation.
In fact, I want to underscore two things that Erin said, and add to them, which is, and the children, when they experience the digital in their home, start to see a blurring between where religious or spiritual activity occurs. So they no longer see this as, oh, I go to this building or I go to this program and that's where that happens, and then I come home and the rest of my life goes on. They start to see that, oh, my life and this engagement in spiritual reflection or spiritual learning intersect. And that's a really important thing if we see spirituality as a way of life and not just a set of beliefs. And secondly, parents overhearing what's going on is always more successful than sending home a leaflet about what you did. It's always better if they're actually kind of hearing it, and their own questions may be generated and their own spiritual reflection may come into play. But also, you don't have to rely on whether the child tells them about what they said and did. They've actually kind of heard it, even if they weren't sitting down with the child. And so they can ask questions or follow up much more organically.
That's so great. Thank you for sharing that. The primary audience for this podcast is mainline progressive church leaders, congregational leaders. If you could change one thing about the way most folks approach children's ministry, what would it be?
Oh, just one thing.
Oh, okay. How about three? No, go ahead. Go on, Queen. Let's hear them.
No. I would say, first off, I would want to change the way we view children. We have this idea that children are naive, kind of not yet able to do much that has to do with what we think of as real religion. So we have to entertain them. We tell them some nice stories in which we kind of sanitized all the negative parts out, and that will engage them. And as long as they know who Noah is and who Mary is, they're good. But in reality, developmental psychology research tells us that kids are showing moral sensibilities from the time that they're about 5 or 6 months old, that they know that helpers are better for community than hinderers, long before Mr. Rogers even, would expect them to know that, that they are asking questions about ethical issues from a very young age. And that they're quite curious, but that our society tends to sort of turn them away from expressing that curiosity by the time they hit school age, because it's inconvenient to have too many questions asked. So I would want our leaders to really see children as young kind of theological reflectors, spiritual agents who are eager to explore this aspect of their identity, just like they're exploring their body and they're exploring language and they're exploring how the world works, and that this is a real opportunity to partner with them, to learn together, rather than to just share information and wait for them to get older before we really have any serious conversations. And the other thing I would say is children are very tuned into what's going on around them, which means they are not nearly as naive as we would like to believe. Any parent can tell you that their child knows a lot more than perhaps we wish. And so we need to have those conversations with them. We need to invite them to share their hopes and fears and dreams. One of my colleagues, Brad Wigger at Louisville Presbyterian Seminary, says, kids are asking big existential questions. We should take them seriously. And I'm in full agreement with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, highlight something that Karen Marie said is that, and she said this word a lot, and we've said it a lot as well, exploring, right? It's not so much about giving them facts or narrowing the road. I think with children, if I could tell leaders, it'd be, how do you open the road up? And how do you, provide more opportunities for kids who we know are inherently spiritual to engage with their own spirituality? And that's a real reversal of how we have traditionally engaged children with their spirituality.
What would be your dream for this project? What would you love to see happen in the next 3 to 5 years with your work here?
Well, we would love for our website to become a go-to resource for a lot more people. Our numbers have been climbing in terms of views over the year that we've been around, but we're just coming out of the COVID years. We all hope. And this project did start after COVID shut us all down. So we've not really experienced it as a non-COVID program until very recently. So we hope that. We also hope that it will help families who are not religiously affiliated, which is this growing body of young families, to see that spirituality is important to their and their children's lives. That this is not an extracurricular that you might pick or you might not, but that we all are people of soul. We all are people who care about meaning and purpose in life, and that spirituality is about meaning and purpose, about ethical responsibility and care and compassion for others. And so we hope that this website provides a way into that's different from the kind of dominant cultural narrative of religion as this more judgmental, narrow values encounter. So we're trying to be a countercultural narrative in terms of the religious dialogue that makes the news.
I don't know, that's such a great, complete answer. I think I often work with innovators, and I would love for more people to be thinking about how we engage children's spirituality in different ways. From little teeny tiny pieces to bigger pieces, how are we starting to do that differently? Because to me, that represents this shift away from how we've done things for decades, and starting to embrace this, how we really understand that children work, that they are already spiritual beings, ready and excited to explore their own notions of spirituality.
And I will say, we've been hearing from a lot of different quarters that the initial response to moving into a post-pandemic era is people wanting to just go back to normal. So we've had innovators, or folks who are interested in innovation, who say, I really want to be doing something innovative, but when I talk to my church hierarchy, when I talk to my families, they just want to go back to normal. And we recognize that's kind of a pastoral care issue. So if that's really where your community's at, okay, go back to normal for like a month or two, and then revisit the question of why normal wasn't working for you in the past, and come back out looking for ways to do something new and different, because we're not the same people we were before this pandemic. And we weren't doing the world's greatest job of children's ministry before the pandemic. So going back to that is not going to make the future look the way we want it to look. So yes, give people some space for normalcy, but then innovate, because that's what's going to help children and their parents and caregivers find the kind of lively spiritual life that they're looking for.
Thank you both so much for joining me and for sharing your work with us all. Where would you like to be found online?
Best place to find us is www.realkidsrealfaith.org.
Excellent. So there are so many resources there, y'all, on all kinds of topics, and just, I think, beautifully done and useful to so many people. So go grab some free help. Get a partner in your work and a partner with your family there. Thank you again for talking with me. Thank you everyone for listening. Until next time, peace and blessings to you all.